All right, so today we'll be going over the product and quotient rule. And essentially, you use these rules when you're trying to find a derivative, and when you're reading the function, you use it when you say the words times, divided by, or over. And whenever you say these words, you must use this rule. So the product rule is written as the derivative with respect to x of some function f of x divided by some function g of x is equal to f prime of x times g of x minus f of x times g prime of x, all divided by g of x squared. And that's the quotient rule, excuse me. So this is the quotient rule. And now we'll be doing the product rule. So if you want to find a derivative with respect to x of f of x times g of x, it's going to be equal to f prime of x times g of x, it should be a multiplication, plus f of x times g prime of x. And so essentially, here's an example. If you look at this function right here, you have this function. So this is going to be one function. And then you have this function. So we'll call this one f of x and this one g of x. So essentially, you're going to have, in this case, you're going to have two functions that are being multiplied against each other. And you're going to have to use this rule. So normally, you're going to use this rule when you're going to have parentheses of some sort. And so we can go over it. And so whenever I write, just for you guys to know, whenever I write f of x, I'm normally going to write it as just f. So in this case, I'll just say f is equal to 2x minus 3x 2 to 2 first. Just ignore this parentheses, that was my bad. And then g of x, which is also, I just write it as g, it's going to be equal to the square root of x plus 1. So then we find a derivative of both of these. So f prime is going to be equal to 2 minus, and in this case, it's just going to become 2x to the negative 1/3. And g prime is going to be equal to 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. Now, according to our product rule, we do f prime first. So this will be 2 minus 2x to the 1/2 times g of x, and g of x is just square root of x plus 1 plus f of x, which is just 2x minus 3x to the 2/3 times g prime of x, and g prime is just 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. And in this case, this is kind of a hard one to simplify, so we won't worry about that right now. However, it is important to simplify as much as you can. However, some of these are just going to be really gruesome, so it's not necessary, but always try as much as possible. So important to simplify as much as possible. However, in this one, this is going to be a really hard one to simplify, so we're just not going to bother with it right now. And so this is an example where you must use the product rule, right? Because you have one function multiplied by another. So you got to use the product rule. And so in this case, we have an example of the quotient rule, where you have some function divided by another function. So you always denote your top function as f of x. Again, I just write it as f. So in this case, our f is just going to be equal to 5x minus 2. And our g, which is the function in the denominator, is just going to be x squared plus 1. Now f prime is going to be equal to 5. G prime is going to be equal to 2x. And so according to our quotient rule, y prime is going to be equal to f prime of x, which is 5, times g, which is just x squared plus 1, minus f of x, so 5x minus 2, times g prime of x, which is just 2x, all divided by g of x squared. So in this case, g of x is x squared plus 1, and then square. So we're left with y prime is equal. We could kind of simplify this one out a little bit. So this would become 5x squared plus 5 minus 5x. Or excuse me, we can actually factor this one in. So this will actually be a 10, right? Because 2x times 5x is negative 10x squared, or 10x squared. And then this will just become negative 4x over x squared plus 1 squared. So we're left with y prime is just going to be equal. We could simplify some things in this case. So 5x squared minus 10x squared is just going to be negative 5x squared minus 4x plus 5, all divided by x squared plus 1 squared. So now remember, you have to use this rule when you say the words times, divided by, or over. So in this case, when we read this one out loud, y is equal to 5 of x divided by x squared plus 1. You got to use these. In this case, we said y is equal to 2x minus 3x to the 2/3 times the square root of x plus 1. We said times, so we got to use the product rule. So this one is quotient rule. All right, so now we're going to try and figure out this one. So this one, we want to find a derivative of y equals x to the 4th times 1 minus 2 divided by x plus 1. So we can rewrite this as y is equal to x to the 4th if we distribute if we FOIL the x to the 4th in. So x to the 4th minus 2x to the 4th divided by x plus 1. So now we have two functions. We're going to have to use in this case, we're going to have to use the quotient rule for this part. In this case, we could just use our normal power rule. So this will just become 4x cubed. And in this case, when we have to use the quotient rule, our f is going to be equal to 2x to the 4th, and our g is going to be equal to x plus 1. Because remember, you have to use f is going to be the numerator and g is going to be the denominator. So f prime is going to be equal to 8x cubed, and g prime is going to be equal just to 1 because the derivative of x is just 1. And so essentially this is going to become y prime is equal to 4x cubed minus, and now we start using the quotient rule. So quotient rule tells us that we got to do f prime of x. So in this case, this would just be 8x cubed times g of x, which is just x plus 1, minus f of x, which is just 2x to the 4th, times g prime of x, which is just 1, all divided by, not this, remember, because this is not part of the quotient rule, but just this part we use for a quotient rule. So in this case, it's going to be x plus 1 squared. Okay, and we can try simplifying this one out. So y prime is going to be equal to 4x cubed minus, and then this will just become 8x to the 4th plus 8x cubed minus 2x to the 4th, and we can get rid of this 1 because it's just 1 times 2x to the 4th, which is just 2x to the 4th, divided by x plus 1 squared. And then we can rewrite this. We can keep simplifying. So 4x cubed is going to be equal, so 8x to the 4th minus 2x to the 4th is just going to be 6x to the 4th. Excuse me, this should be a minus 6x to the 4th plus 8x cubed divided by x plus 1 squared. And we could further simplify this. So y prime is going to be equal 4x cubed minus 8x cubed is just going to become negative 4x cubed. So we're left with 6 to the 4th minus 4x cubed divided by x plus 1 squared. And there you go. So that's going to be the product and quotient rule. Again, this is a very important rule, and you have to use these when you have two functions either being multiplied by each other or being divided by each other. And when you say the words times, divided by, or over when you read out the function, you're going to have to use these rules.